All right. So now that we've learned kind of the basics of methods, we're going to do something which I think is really the guts of this chapter, but it's super tough. So the idea is that if we're starting to make a program, that instead of making it all happen in main, we want to break it down into little tasks, write each method of them, write a method for each of them, and then piece them all together in main. All right. So we talked about this with the Justin Bieber song that we want to break it down into little pieces so that main is really simple. It just has like an overview of what's happening, and then we use the little pieces to construct the song. Right. And the hardest thing I think for students on this is the variables. So this one's pretty easy to understand because there's no like input and output variables. All right, which is not going to be the case with this Pythagorean theorem one. So it's pretty tough. And I know in the past year students have had problems like dealing with the different variables and where do they go. Um, so that's the trickiest part of this. But anyways, let's just start with like maybe not even what's up here, but what would be the different steps, like the little pieces we would need to do this. And to help us understand this a little more, here's the output of like the completed program. They enter a leg, they enter another leg, and then we spit out the hypotenuse. So what would be the small little pieces? And there's no one right answer to this, but pause the video and see if you can figure out what do you think the pieces to this would be. Okay, so we need to have the user enter leg 1. Then we need to have the user enter leg 2. Okay, and then again, we could break it down really detailed, but kind of a like methods, you don't need to do like every tiny little piece, but just like a task. So another task we need to do is calculate the hypotenuse. So we have to do the math essentially. And then the final step sort of is to display the hypotenuse. Okay, and again, you could break this down further and say we gotta like square the legs, then add them together, and then take the square root. That's a little too detailed, I guess. Like we don't need a method for each one of those tasks. We just want to do like the general tasks. And so again, there's not a right answer to this, but this is roughly how I would construct it. All right. And so then the other piece to realize on this is these two can be like a single method, right? Because they really are the same thing. They just say enter the value of the leg, they type it in, and we store it. So these really can be a single method. All right, so we're actually probably just going to need one method here, a second method for calculating the hypotenuse, and then a third for displaying it. All right, so those are going to be the two little pieces. All right, furthermore, all right, so the tricky part of this to me is all the variables. So basically, the output from these legs are going to be the inputs for the hypotenuse, right? So to calculate the hypotenuse, we need the two legs. So we're actually going to take the output from these two methods, feed it into the hypotenuse method, right? Feed these leg values in, and it's going to return, then this method, the hypotenuse method, will return a hypotenuse, which then will just get displayed by this last method. All right, so we're going to take the output from these ones and plug them into the input for the hypotenuse method. Ugh, sounds complex, right? So let's take it piece by piece. Okay, so let's do this first method of have them enter a leg. All right, so let's do create the code quick, or create a new class file. All right, so here we go. So we got our main, and I'm going to call this one Pythagorean with methods. Right? And so the main's going to be blank, but that's again going to be like the high level view of what's happening. And right now we just want to make one that will have the user enter the leg and then scan for that answer. All right, so as far as inputs go to this method, input is actually none because the user is going to provide the number, right? So the method doesn't have any input. And then the output is going to be the leg value that they enter, right? Which you can just treat it as a double. All right, so Again, you can pause and kind of try and do some of this on your own. If you feel like you can do the method now, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll go through it in a second here. Okay, so this method is going to be public, static, and then a double because we're returning the leg. And we're going to call it whatever we want. So I'm going to call it getLeg. Okay, and there's no input, right? Because the input, again, is coming from the user using scanner. Okay, so I'm going to make the scanner equals new scanner. And I'll need to add the import. So oftentimes I just keep typing and it adds the input for me, the import statement for me. Okay, so I'm going to prompt the user. So please enter the leg. And I'm going to scan it. So I'm going to do double leg equals scan dot next double. All right. And then from there, I'm just going to return that. Right. So they're going to enter it with the scanner. I'm going to store it in leg and then I'm going to return that back to main. Okay. So in that sense, right. So basically when I do my Pythagorean theorem, I do like int leg 1 and then usually give it a value. And then I do int leg 2 and give it a value. Okay. But how could we use this method now, right? Like instead of declaring them this way, what could we change here to use this method? Okay, and so the answer is I'm just going to call the getLeg method, right? Call getLeg method twice. Spell it, right? That would help. Okay, so what'll happen is it'll go down in this code, run the code, prompt them, get the value and return it, and then that'll get stored in this leg1 variable here. Geez, I'm struggling to type this. So, and I'm going to reuse the code twice because it does the same thing, right? I'm just prompting them and having them enter. And I'm just going to do it the same method twice and then store it in two different variables. Okay, so it's going to prompt them twice. Sorry, these should have been doubles instead of ints. It's going to prompt them twice and then store it in these variables. All right, so we've done piece one. We had them enter it and we called the same method twice. And now we have to feed those outputs down to the calculate hypotenuse. Okay, so this method is going to probably be the hardest one, the calculate hypotenuse. So we could kind of think of what are the inputs and outputs again. All right, so I'd pause the video, give it a shot before continuing. Okay, so the input is going to be the two legs, so two doubles, and the output's going to be another double, which is the hypotenuse. So I'm going to do public static double, which is again going to be the output hypotenuse, and call it whatever. So I'm going to call it calculate hypotenuse, and it's going to take in the two legs. So I'm going to do double leg 1, maybe let's call it A, and double B. Okay, and now I just have to actually do the calculations and return that. So I'm going to do, let's see, double step 1 equals A times A plus B times B, and Java will depend us there, so we're okay. So we squared them and added together. And then I'm just going to return right now. I'm going to return math.square root of step 1. So I just got to square root it and return it, and that'll be my hypotenuse. Right, so it's a little bit more complex line there, but it's going to return it. Okay, so now what was going to go up here, right? See if you can use this method to piece it together in main. How could we use the method? Okay, so I'm going to do double hypotenuse, right? So I'm going to make a hypotenuse variable, and I'm going to call my method. So I'm actually going to just copy and paste the name. I don't want to retype it. And then I'm going to pass in the two legs that I got from the previous method, leg 1, leg 2. Boom, 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 it'll do its calculations. Okay, and then let's see. So we've done this, we've calculated the hypotenuse, and then we just got to feed it into a method that'll display it. All right, so I'm going to make the final method. All right, and think again of input and output for this display hypotenuse method. What would be the input and output? Okay, so the input would be the hypotenuse, right? And the output would be void because all we're going to do is a print, right? So we don't need to really return anything here. We just need to display this. So it's going to be a void method. Okay, so I'm going to do public static void display hypotenuse. And we have to say, hey, what hypotenuse value do we want to display, right? So that's going to be a variable because the hypotenuse is going to be different each time. Okay, and then we're just going to sys out, and we'll make it nice and fancy, say the hypotenuse is whatever gets passed. Okay, and then this code won't run currently because we have to call it. So we don't need this part anymore with the equals because this one is a void method. So all we got to do is call the name. So I'm just going to call the name display hypotenuse. Okay, and I'm going to pass in the hypotenuse value. All right, so in that sense, after I calculate it, I'm just going to display it out here. All right, so let's run it and see if we can get this to go. So we're going to do 5 and 3, and then it spits out the hypotenuse. Okay, so we've already done Pythagorean Theorem before, but this is a much better way to do it because it's all broken down into tiny little tasks, right? And it's easy to kind of understand what's going on in main by looking at it. And then if one piece breaks, like if we wanted to change the get leg method or something, we can just go down here and change it quick without any difficulty. Okay. I thought just to kind of make this as concrete as possible, I would run this in the Java visualizer just so you can watch what's happening, and it'll start in main and then jump around into the little methods. So I'm gonna see if I can get it to run here. Oh, it doesn't know about scanner. It's got to import it. Okay, so that's the idea. Break it down into tiny little pieces, and then the main will run, but it'll jump through the different pieces. Okay, just to finish this off, I wanted to show you what the code looks like when it runs step by step and how it jumps around in all these methods, because I think that's kind of confusing, and I think this visual will give you a better understanding of it. So if you want to do this with me, it's called debug mode. It's this little debug up here, but you have to set what's called a breakpoint, which is a stopping point. So to do that, you have to go over on the side here, right where my cursor is, and then right click and do toggle breakpoint. It looks like Control-Shift-B will also work, and it'll hit a little circle right there, so it's going to stop on this line of code when we hit the debug. So I'm going to hit the little bug. Okay, and it's going to say, do you want to switch to the debug perspective? And I'm going to hit yep. You can switch back and forth between your perspectives up here. But now I'm in debug, so it shows me I'm on this line, and I'm going to hit F6 to step into the method. So what will happen is I'll hit F6, and then it'll jump down and say, here we're inside this method, and I can watch it run line by line. Here's the output. Now it's hanging for me to enter something. It gets it, stores that in leg. So you can see leg bucket here, that is 5. And then it returns from the method. And then this variable leg1 up here, it has that value that was returned from the method. Now I'm going to step into it again. Step, step, step. And it says, please enter leg. And now I'm going to enter a different number like 7. So now it's going to return 7. And then up here, leg 2, that bucket has a different value of 7. Okay, and so calculate hypotenuse, I'm going to step into that. And you can see A and B take on the inputs, the 5 and 7. So they do the math, and then we return it. And the hypotenuse bucket stores that amount. Then I'm going to step into this method, which passed in that number, and then it just prints it out. Boom, you're done. So I thought that debugger is kind of a cool thing to see what's happening, and you can stop it by hitting this.